This episode of the Event Industry News podcast is sponsored by Evolution Dome, award-winning temporary inflatable event structures. Take a look at their structures at evolutiondome.com.
Hello everybody, welcome to the Event Industry News podcast with me, James Dickson. Wishing you all a very good morning, afternoon or evening, whenever or wherever you join today's podcast from. We're going to be talking about the subject of scaling our events, and specifically scaling our events with event tech and using event tech. So many wonderful sort of opportunities, platforms, types of tech available and at our disposal now as event organisers, and certainly from a scalability point of view, often allows us to increase the size and the scale of our events without some of the hassles, I suppose, that we may have had 10, 15 years ago, if people can remember back that far. I'm delighted to say that my guest today is a name that will be extremely familiar with anybody that works in and around the tech sector, and is somebody with significant experience of this subject. He now runs his own business, Allenby Advisory. I'm delighted to say that joining the Event Industry News podcast today is Ade Allenby. Welcome to the podcast, Ade.
Hello, James. Nice to be here.
Excellent. And we were just talking off air about all sorts of stuff non-tech related, like glorious weather and stuff. So for our sort of international listeners who tune into this regularly, it's once again a glorious day for most of us in the UK, which I know from feedback that we've had is news that people sometimes fail to comprehend internationally, who always think it's raining and miserable in this part of the world, Ade. But yeah, I can certainly attest to the fact that I'm looking out my window at the moment on another glorious UK day.
That's right. And forgive me. I'm wearing my Father's Day T-shirt, Incroyable comme ma fille, to celebrate my daughter and being in France last week.
Excellent. Yes. Again, the subject of off-air discussions is often the case on this podcast. But yeah, Ade, you're somebody who's spent a significant amount of time in and around various different tech platforms, which is where a lot of people will know your name from in the event tech industry, now working for yourself. So very much in a position to be able to look, I suppose, objectively at how over the last, I'm going to say decade to start with, because certainly I've seen, since my work began with Event Tech Live, and that was born out of this sort of growing trend towards event tech and it becoming its own sector, to the sort of behemoth in some respects that it is today as a sector in its own right. When we talk about how technology has evolved over the years, I guess off the top of your head, what would you say are the sort of the most significant advances that we've seen in how we can use it to scale our events?
Well, I think the changes has been that event tech originally sat kind of on the fringes of the experience. So that was how you deploy your directories and your schedules, and you make them available digitally. And now more and more we're seeing the ability to collect and use behavioral data from the show floor. So I think what we're seeing now is tools that help people to engage, help people to connect, and also generate data, help us better understand the audience and what's providing value.
When I look at how we scale and improve and increase how much we understand from our events now, something that I was talking about on a recent episode of the podcast with the design team from IMEX, who unveiled a significant, complete overhaul and rebrand of the IMEX brand in Frankfurt this year. And they'd actually used technology. They'd used a facial analysis platform in order to monitor the reactions of people who were walking through the show floor for the first time and seeing the new brand for the first time. And I look at and what that highlighted to me is how great some of this technology is now, but how easily deployable it is. And I think that's one of the key sort of developments in the last few years is how some of this actual tech on a show floor, for example, has become really easily deployable.
Yeah, that's right. So cameras are probably one of the easiest things to locate, and can capture a lot of data, and now can capture not only counts of people passing a certain place, but sentiment, even down to demographic, about age group and gender. So you can easily get samples of data from different places and compare them to each other to see how the event is performing. There are then other technologies that are getting simpler to deploy. So, like for instance, Bluetooth technologies, which are used to help navigate on the show floor and to understand, like tracking people around the show floor. Used to have to do a lot of work fingerprinting to actually help the Bluetooth network to understand where you are on the show floor, and now that can all be done algorithmically. So, there's advances to get some of this more high-end tech onto the show floor, make it easier to deploy, which means that in the tight timescales that you've got to set it up, it's more achievable.
And certainly I see it creeping into, I suppose, what you may say are more sort of traditional elements of the supply chain on the show floor. When I think to Event Tech Live in Las Vegas, we worked with a great supplier over there for the first time that had these really nice sort of vertical display screens, digital display screens that we could all sorts of nice stuff on. And one of the elements there was that you could, touch any given one of these units around the show floor, and that unit knew where it was, so it could then offer you a map route to an exhibitor or to a particular stage or a particular area of the show that you might want to find. You'd touch it and it would draw you a map, because they were able to configure each unit quite easily in terms of showing how where it was on the show floor. And I suppose that element there is maybe not particularly complicated or complex, but to a traditional supplier like an AV supplier, I'm seeing more and more that they're able to incorporate elements of event technology into some of the more traditional offerings, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and this is one of the topics that I wanted to touch on with respect to using technology to scale. It's very important to use the Pema Chodron term. Start where you are, and where you are in terms of the customer experience and why people come to your event. And so you got to understand, well, what is the next thing? What's going to help them do that better? Because year on year you're building the engagement with what you're providing, and then you're looking for opportunities, because everybody wants to everybody wants to make sure that their clients, their exhibitors, their attendees get value for money. But if you're a relatively small event, it's going to be more cost effective for you to have a really good interactive floor plan, a really good directory, things like messaging to exhibitors, rather than a meetings platform, because the data suggests that once you if you just put a meetings platform in place, you're going to get a lot of exhibitors who are sending invites and not getting a lot of return on that, because the people expect to be able to get around the hall, they expect to be able to get around the floor, but it's helping them get round in the most efficient way and search for what they want, and making the floor plan searchable, making the directory searchable, even things like when you click on the theatre, it shows you what's on in that theatre. Having that kind of ecosystem of tools that are really geared around why people are there. And then as you build out, you say, right, okay, we've now got to a scale where if people don't pre-book meetings, then they might be disappointed, and we want to make sure we want to have a specific networking activity going on, or speed networking or something like that, where that's going to be a concentrated thing, because we think that that it's now time to include that in your value proposition.
And you raise an interesting point there in terms of, yes, we can use event tech to scale and increase and improve our events, but similarly we've got to be careful when we consider what we're deploying, that it doesn't actually work in the opposite direction. So when you mentioned there about event platforms, event sort of meetings platforms, great when they work. They work really, really well, and they work for certain types of shows. But like you said, if it's a smaller event where people feel that they can get around the show floor, don't just deploy something because you think, oh, right, that ticks a box, if that makes sense. I think sometimes we could be guilty of getting caught in trends, and we have to sometimes just take a step back and think, well, is that trend necessarily suitable for my event?
Yeah, and so I was head of innovation at Reed Exhibitions for 7.5 years, and one of the questions that came up time and time again is, to what extent do we need a meetings platform? To what extent do we need an app? And it is it is based on whether people will use it or not, and it's your understanding of if you've got a lot of buyers coming in who are intending to spend one day and they want to fill a meeting schedule, but that's you've got to balance that against, say, for instance, offering just the ability to send messages, which is easier in terms of the technology and less cumbersome in terms of setup. And yet I message an exhibitor, say, do you offer this product or do you serve this market? I do. Right, I'll come and see you. And understanding how that can grease the wheels, in those circumstances, as well as booking a meeting could.
And you open up another avenue of conversation there about adoption and being very, very careful to look at your attendees and to look at your exhibitors, and on a case by case basis identify whether or not they are savvy enough, and I mean this in the nicest way, but are they a savvy enough audience to adopt some of the technology that you might want to deploy? Do you have to maybe look at a time scale where you may roll certain things out over a couple of shows rather than pushing a load of stuff out at once? Because I'm fortunate that with Event Tech Live, for example, I know that I'm working with an audience of people who are walking through the door who fundamentally have an understanding of technology and will be able to probably access it quite easily, as will the exhibitors. If I was working a completely different trade show with a completely different audience and set of exhibitors, they may not have the ability to maybe access some of that straight away.
Yeah, and what some of the smaller events are doing is, these tend to be kind of the smaller conference and meetings events. They're doing meeting matching or arranging meetings on behalf of VIPs and sponsors, and they're often doing that by by spreadsheets and lists, and manual reaching out. And there's an opportunity there for those events to use a platform just to help them do that task initially, but then potentially to open it out. So you're kind of taking it from the other direction. So rather than just kind of putting a meeting platform in and hoping people will use it, you're building up a level of usage of the meetings platform and using it as the place where people go to see who, when their meetings are, and then allowing them to arrange ad hoc meetings on top of that. So that's another way to think about how it can add value.
Measuring the success of an event is something that, if you forget event technology, is something that we've been trying to do for decades in the event industry. Before we had sort of data and analytical tools available for us, there was always this sort of, question after how successful was it, and that to me has been a bit of a minefield for organisers and events people that I've spoken to, because in some respects there are so many options to them now that they don't know how to identify what may be the right solution for them. When it comes to actually asking that question, how successful was my event, what are sort of some of the simple technological processes that people could use now to answer that question?
Well, first of all, I think you've got to understand the different persona types or the different user types for your event. Do you have people that are really pretty much coming for content? Are people coming to discover new products? Are they coming to reconnect with existing suppliers? And what does success look like? So in each of those in each of those groups. Now you can then have measures for lead capture, engagement with session content, things like even time spent on show floor. If you've got the right kind of tracking products, you can see who visited which stands, as in how much footfall different stands got, and they can be ranked according to the level of engagement. So there's lots of different ways you can kind of proxy for footfall, engagement through leads, engagement through content capture, with maybe so NFC badging, scanning to collect information or collecting from QR codes. All of these different elements allow you to build up a picture. Now, the important thing is that you consider the basics of what you do with that data. Now, part of that is CRM. All of your audience should be in the CRM so that you can know who to market what to, and of these segments of different usages of the event, who you're marketing which features of your event to make sure that they attend the event. But then bringing these data points into ideally the CRM, but CRMs often charge per record. So it may make sense to have a point of truth database where you can then see all these engagement touch points that you've captured at the event. And from there, you can either run a scoring or devise performance metrics and dashboards to track engagement over time.
And look, so one thing I don't want to sort of leave this till the end of the episode, because it was something that I felt was going to play quite an important role in the conversation, and it's the iOS update and the announcement that was made quite a few weeks ago now about airdrop and name drop and sharing contact information just by holding two sort of iOS devices over each other, and how that could effectively eliminate the need for some of the sort of the digital touch points that we become quite familiar with in events. And I suppose the avenue of conversation that I wanted to open up was that in recent years we've started to utilize the technology that 99.9% of people carry around in their pockets now. So we've seen Q&A, for example, in a conference theatre. People use their mobile device, they access a digital Q&A platform without the need to have then a roving microphone going around the room, which helps in all manner of aspects, upvoting of questions, for example. So we're utilising that device that's in people's pockets already. This sort of update and that was announced recently, I'm just wondering whether or not it's actually going to not necessarily eliminate, but change how we look at certain processes on the show floor when we can continue to evolve the technology and the hardware that people are carrying around in their pockets anyway.
Yeah, and I think you're never going to completely rule out people handing over business cards, but I think at events, at B2B events, we kind of operate within this walled garden of I'm bringing certain information which I'm using to register, and I'm happy for that to be shared with exhibitors, and then I've got the choice whether or not to follow up with them afterwards. If we're happy to give up other personal information via this kind of mechanism, then that's up to us. We can write a phone number down. We can give people our personal emails. That's all possible. But I think the idea of there being some kind of exchange of information, the visitors that want information about the products that they've seen, and they want to get that as easily as possible and without kind of being hassled too much from a sales perspective. And the exhibitors, of course, want good data on some key things about that attendee, which things like what is their seniority and role, and even sort of BANT information about their buying intentions, which they're not going to have on their phone. So I think we've got to understand that type of environment, and that other things will just add to the levels of engagement, and hopefully make that easier.
Yeah, absolutely. You're under the banner now of Allenby Advisory, which is allowing you, no doubt, to use the experiences that you've had at working for organisers, then working for tech companies, and then helping organisers, no doubt, and indeed other tech providers now, by drawing on some of that experience. What I suppose what it might seem like a really obvious question to ask, but what are the sort of the common questions that you get asked by clients when you're speaking to them about how and what they should be looking at from a technology point of view? Because we take for granted sometimes that all event organizers will just be aware of what the latest technological trends are out there and what's available to them as organizers. But again, I know from speaking to organizers who visit shows on the show floor at Event Tech Live that they are genuinely there to explore new possibilities. What are some of the obvious questions that you get asked?
Well, I think the organisers have a couple of challenges. Is that very few organizer businesses are big enough to employ a dedicated event technology specialist, and of course, the digital teams become specialists in event technology. They look at a lot of stuff, but maybe for teams that don't even have a dedicated digital person, they have a marketing team. Going and looking for a new platform for a specific need can be difficult. You've got to sit through a lot of demos. Maybe you're not quite clear on what the potential differences are between different platforms, and so to kind of benchmark across a particular type of platform is a big task. So that's one aspect, and in that regard, the businesses like mine who have experience across the market can take it the other way around, and this is where I would advise organizers to go, to try and kind of specify out what it is they want and put that spec to a vendor. And just, it doesn't have to be arduous, it doesn't have to be a long thing, it's just to keep aims and objectives and to get that initial response back on why they're better than the competition at doing that particular thing.
Sorry, I'm sorry to interject here, but you open up another question here, which I want to ask, which is what's your opinion on the current state of tech pitches from tech companies? Because I've sat through loads. You no doubt have probably sat through them and also been responsible for delivering pitches and presentations, and demos to potential clients. I've seen the sort of the good and bad of it. Where are we at the moment in terms of pitching technology to clients?
Well, very glad you asked. So that's one of the things that Allenby Advisory can help tech vendors with, because as you say, I've tried to take technology products internally to event teams, and understood that there's different stakeholders within those teams with different needs, and you've kind of got to make sure you tick all of those off. I think it's easy to be very product focused. It's easy to be kind of inside out, saying, "Oh, look, I can do all these things," rather than taking it as what is the key need here for the client, and what difference does this product actually make to the thing that you're bothered about. Because a capability that sounds like it would be a great experience for an attendee, you still got to put in terms of, well, what's the return on that? What additional value? Even if it's just the increase in experience, or the improvement of experience is going to mean that people reach their goals more easily, and then retain. You increase retention, but you still got to use that terminology to explain the product. This is the thing that we're trying to move the dials on for you, rather than my product is really good at this. You could use the examples of the meetings platforms, in that the great meetings platforms are the ones that make meetings really easily. And coming back to the last point, using the tools you've already got, my native calendar or my email, as rather than always having to log into a platform, I can kind of see where things are on the tools that I would ordinarily use.
And again, that's potentially a good bit of advice, isn't there, for event organisers shopping around and looking for new technology? Is how easy does it integrate with everyone's sort of day-to-day ecosystem? Because there's not an individual that I know that doesn't have their own sort of day-to-day ecosystem. Their preferred calendar that they live out of, their preferred email app on their mobile device, that their preferred work sort of planning platform or messaging platform, whether that be something like Asana or Slack, whatever it is that they use to sort of manage their day-to-day workloads, and that integration with what people use on a day-to-day basis, and having the ability to maybe integrate with a number of those different options is probably critical, I think, when you're considering any form of tech platform.
Yeah, and I think a kind of top tip, kind of hack for smaller teams, or any team, is some of the calendar marketing tools that are available, that mean that you can set out a number of milestone tasks, be that for the speakers preparing, exhibitors preparing, and with one click, they can save all of those reminders to their own native calendar, and that saves a lot of chasing, a lot of following up, and a lot of work and legwork on the side of the organizer.
Yeah, the one that springs to mind there, it's nothing to do with, well, it is sort of event related, but not event related. One that just seems to work for me is whenever I book accommodation for work or anything on booking.com, as soon as I get an email confirmation, my devices sort of detect that I've made a booking. They see that email, and then I instantly get some sort of notification on my calendar app on my iPhone saying, do you want to add this to your calendar, with all the information of the hotel and everything, which I can then just hit a button and go straight into. And whilst it's not specifically event related, for me, that's a good example of how a tech platform has thought, how can it, make people's lives a little bit easier by automating itself.
Yeah.
I'm going to go back very quickly because I scribbled something down while you were talking about the pitch side of things and helping tech companies with how they pitch to clients. Event tech suppliers and their websites. I've been on loads over the last few years, and I'm amazed still by how many event tech providers' websites I go on, and I have to scroll or sometimes go sort of 2 or 3 pages in before I actually get a simple, clear 1-paragraph explanation as to what that platform does. And I don't know whether or not it's just me that gets frustrated with it. If it's something that you've come across, again, working with tech platforms in an advisory capacity, is actually not just when it comes to pitching and demoing to a client, but actually their first point of contact, whether that be social media or a website, is explaining very, very quickly in such a competitive marketplace as to what they actually do.
Yeah, that's it. And I'd seen the same. I did a social post after Complex, I think it was, about just trying to showcase some of the examples where you walk up to the stand and you immediately know what they do because they're visually, verbally, and making it front and center, explaining not only what they do but why that adds value. What is the why to what they're doing. So I think also, something that I try and encourage vendors to use and also organizers to use is short video, demo videos, product, this 30-second to 60-second, this is what it does and this is why it can help you, is I think a game changer if you make that easily accessible, because it's you can then do without all the scrolling because you've got it there, especially if you're using screenshots. A lot of companies kind of lean on using stock photos of lovely people at events. And actually, the people coming to the website know what an event looks like. They want to know what your platform looks like, and why I immediately understand what that's for, because it's got a great user interface. I think that's one way to look at it.
Yeah, and this might be an awkward question, but I have asked it before. If an event technology can't be explained in sort of 30 seconds or in a paragraph or two of words, or a 30-second demo video, does that mean that maybe the tech is not quite where it needs to be, that it might need rethinking a little bit if it's so complicated that it can't be explained really easily?
Yeah, I think anything that's being sold standalone, I think there are other products which add value once you've kind of gone down a certain path, that can help enhance value and potentially more complex. But if you're trying to sell off your own website, yeah, you need a 30-second pitch.
We're rattling through time today on today's episode. I've just had a quick glance down at the clock, and I know that it's usually a good conversation when I haven't looked at the clock at all and I look down and go, oh, crap, we're 29 minutes in already. It's an awkward one, but I've got to ask, sort of, in terms of predictions and future, for all the teenagers out there, Mystic Meg and all of that. Where are we at the moment, and where are we stepping forward into in the next couple of years in terms of what technology we are deploying, and what are you seeing organizers come to you and say, look, this is really what we need in the next couple of years?
I think this idea of sensor data is going to be is going to be more prevalent. I think there's got to be an exchange of value. If I allow myself to be tracked, what do I get in return? So whether it's being able to navigate better, whether it's actually getting a list of everything that I visited on site or the people that I spoke to, being able to get more value because actually there's a better record of what you've done, or more information coming to you as a result. I think that's gonna really help. I think the AI content piece is going to be a big game changer. I think in terms of writing your schedule, marketing, writing emails, writing social posts. Now, AI tools can help you do all of this, and I think you still need to hone it and sense check it. Currently, it still needs somebody who knows what they're talking about to know that it's good. But it can definitely give you a really good start and help you to deliver more as an event marketing professional.
Yeah, and I saw a great post on LinkedIn. No, on Friday I had a look at it, and it was a great post that somebody put up about how they built, an event website using AI tools. To create all that content, and then done something, done all the SEO for them. So, that's a whole other discussion, isn't it? The AI and how that is going to impact on the events industry. And there's loads of stuff that's happened on LinkedIn. If you go on any of the sort of the event tech groups or the event groups or the familiar names that crop up on LinkedIn, it's worth having a look at that as a sort of totally separate discussion in its own right, isn't it? About how AI is going to influence events in the coming years.
And I think the thing that our expectations of AI, I think, are going to improve the usage of conversational interfaces. I think if you imagine your average show and people wondering where things are, or the exhibitors wondering why their lights don't work, or when is such and such turning up, to actually have a conversational interface that can answer those questions and be a chat bot within a messaging platform, or an actual speech to text, to be able to just ask a tool and it say, okay, the answer to that question, or we know that this is turning up then, or here's the right person to speak to. Those things are, we're expecting more of them. So I think the limitations of chat previously are going to erode away as we expect the answers to be better.
And I chuckle at the mention of, why are my lights not working? Because usually that's the thing that falls in my lap in terms of show floor operations. Is somebody says, oh, I have no lights, or I should have lights, or I have no power, or I have no, all of those sort of operational questions that are critical. You're never going to get away from them, but they're quite time consuming on site. Firefighting stuff on a show floor during a build and actually during a live event, probably takes up a huge percentage of the show floor operations. And so any sort of tools that come to market that would help answer those, or even just usually it's a case of directing somebody to the appropriate help desk, sometimes behind the scenes. And so if AI can help just direct people, that probably takes away 20 or 30 questions a day.
Yeah, and again, part of one of the themes I've been talking about is this sort of getting the basics right. And if you know that there's potentially a small number of people dealing with a large number of problems, then you need to consider a ticketing platform. You need to consider making sure that you're directing queries in the right way. We're very used to relying on WhatsApp groups, and I think there's a tipping point which actually works kind of for smaller teams where you can't just throw people at it, to say, actually, have we brought in everybody's queries, and are we assigning those to the right people? And AI more and more will be able to answer a lot of them anyway, as a sort of first as a first layer, and then to help direct them.
Absolutely. We've had the pleasure on the podcast today of talking to Ade Allenby from Allenby Advisory, just about scaling event tech, some advice, some information, drawing on Ade's history in the events industry, both from an operational side of things, working with Reed and then with tech companies as well. And it would only be fair to say that if you want to maybe find out a little bit more about what Ade's doing in that capacity, Allenby-advisory.com is Ade's website. And if you go go there, one of the first things you'll see actually is a fantastic picture of you on the main stage at Event Tech Live,
Indeed.
with a microphone in your hand and one of our wireless headsets on your head, being part of one of our sessions last year at Excel, I think it is.
That's right.
The
I'm going for the brand of he talks about stuff and hopefully knows what he's talking about.
and presumably LinkedIn as well, a platform that people can get you on if they're listening to this today and want to connect.
That's right, Ade Allenby on LinkedIn, and we've got an Allenby advisory page as well. So please do connect with me on there.
Excellent. And yeah, thanks for your time today, Ade. Good luck, you know, with in sort of the continuous success of this advisory role and the consultancy capacity that you're working in now, drawing on this experience, and no doubt we'll see you not just on the podcast again in future, but I'm sure you know, events, you know, over the short, medium and long term, giving us some of that knowledge, like you did on that lovely picture at Event Tech Live.
Indeed. And I've got just a couple of parting thoughts. One is start where you are, you know, look at your customers and what their, you know, immediate goals are, and to inform your choices in what you're using, and make sure that your data flows are working. You know, how are you using CRM, how are you pulling data from these different tools. Make sure that those are working for you, and really informing how you can grow your event.
Yeah, and if you want to continue the conversations along those lines directly with Ade, just get in touch using some of the platforms and website, etc. that we've already mentioned. And on the subject of websites, if you're listening to our podcast today via your chosen podcast platform, thanks very much for tuning in and being a regular listener, for subscribing to the podcast. Don't forget to also go to the eventindustrynews.com website so that you can check out the latest news, special features, supplements, all that good stuff that happens on eventindustrynews.com. Make sure that you're signed up for the email newsletter if you're not already a subscriber to the eventindustrynews.com newsletter, and of course the A to Z supplier directory that's on the Event Industry News website. If you're an event organizer, planner, and you're looking for a service, a supplier, a piece of technology, then there's a high probability that you will find it listed within the A to Z supplier directory on the eventindustrynews.com website. If you're already there today and you're watching a video version of this podcast, hello to you. Thanks for tuning in again. And don't forget that if you haven't already done so, you can go in the opposite direction and search for the Event Industry News podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. Subscribe to the audio versions of our podcast and listen to those while you're out and about, commuting, enjoying a bit of sunshine, walking your dog, as I will be later. Yeah, great way to tune in also to some of the archived episodes. You know, if you search by particular topics and subject matter within the Event Industry News podcast, you'll find that there are all sorts of podcasts over the probably 7 or 8 years that we've been doing this now that tie into topics that we're talking about even up to today. So yeah, thanks very much as always to everybody for tuning in and listening. Thanks again to my guest Ade Allenby for joining the podcast today, and we'll see you all on the next edition of the Event Industry News podcast. Goodbye, everybody.